For me, I'm very much, I'm here's a problem. Let's take care of it. I have a solution for that.
Our goal when we opened was to provide the highest quality care that was possible at a price people could afford.
I literally talk to physicians daily. Kelly, I can't even log in to see my own billing. I have no idea what's going on. I get a report once a month and nobody can explain it to me. I make it a point to train the physicians how to go and pull their own report.
I'm going to be on the course reporting tomorrow afternoon.
You are?
I am. I'm going to follow Jordan Spieth and Will Zalatoris and Scotty Scheffler. I'm not really reporting, but I am going to go watch the course.
Probably drink a couple beers.
Yeah, I might have a beer or two tomorrow afternoon. I mean, that would make my commentary even better.
Well, hey everybody! Thanks for joining us this week on our episode of the Cutting Edge Podcast. We are blessed to be joined by one heck of a guest this week. The fact that this gentleman has been able to carve out 45 minutes of his time to speak with us today. I'm hoping I don't get a bill after this, Tyler, because we are, after all, talking to an attorney. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But before we jumpstart into that conversation, I wanted to make mention of a few folks that we want to thank for sponsoring us. First being Texas Assist Surgical Assist Staffing. Second being the Carrington Group, which is your firm.
Yeah.
And then also thank Jen Eaton and Moonshot Marketing Group for helping get all of our social media networks set up and our website and all those fun things. And also Ortho Lone Star, who's been a great supporter of ours here out of Dallas. For all those that are curious, you can find us on all the major social media networks. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. We try to do video and audio. I'm not so sure that my face was made for video.
Neither was mine.
Yeah. So we'll try to not.
That's a good way to get into a wreck, is to try to watch us on video and listen at the same time. So
yeah. So without further ado, my co-host Tyler Tallman sitting to my right. Let's welcome Scott Becker.
Yeah.
With Beckers Healthcare and McGuireWoods. Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Well, Tyler, CJ, a pleasure to visit with you today. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to visiting with you folks. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we're blessed to have you. You might be the busiest guy in healthcare, and that's saying something, knowing where administrators and healthcare providers have been the last 18 months. But you're based out of Chicago, correct?
Yes, based out of Chicago, and we're busy, but we don't do the heroic work that our healthcare leaders do, our nurses, our doctors do. It's a whole different kind of busy, and it's a pleasure, a total pleasure. But my hat's off to everybody in the field that's actually dealing with patient care issues and dealing with patients and so forth. But yes, we're busy, but it's a different kind of busy than the people that are heroic in the field. So, well, but a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
You have built one heck of a following. The fact that you have 300,000 people that follow you on LinkedIn and follow Beckers Healthcare on LinkedIn, man, I'm so excited to talk about how you've built that community. And if you can just, dive in, talk to us about your background, what you do professionally and kind of how Beckers Healthcare started. Let's start
Sure. No, thank you for asking. So I started Beckers Healthcare literally like 30 years ago for completely different reasons than ended up being what it ended up being. When it originally started 30 years ago, and like many businesses, many things, they start for different reasons and end up being something else. I started it back in the day. I was a young lawyer trying to build a following, trying to build a brand as a lawyer, not as a media person. And we were trying to build a reputation as someone who's plugged into, at that point, we're in the surgery center areas where we started originally, as someone plugged in who knew the legal and business issues related to the surgery center environment. And we really started up the media efforts, and it was first a small conference, a small newsletter, or literally a paper newsletter on a very small website. This is before websites were even really a thing. And we sort of were really motivated in part, one, to build a practice, two, because the other associations, the other vehicles that you would use to get in front of the audience were so tied to other law firms, other people, that they wouldn't let us have airtime. They wouldn't let us be involved. And so we ended up ultimately, back at 30 years ago, starting our own thing. And it was really to build a reputation in the surgery center business. Then I fast forward 15, 20 years, until about 15 years ago, we were outsourcing everything in the business. And at that point started to see this could be a real business and have a real impact in healthcare, not just be sort of a legal branding or marketing type of game. And we started to build a serious media company. And at that point started to hire full-time employees and started to build teams out in different areas of the company. So whether editorial team, events team, sales team, account management team, and started to build those things out. And of the various different people that I hired, some of them ended up just being spectacular and have been with me since we really started hiring full-time employees. So it was really, started 30 years ago for a different purpose. And then about 15, 17 years ago, got serious about it being a true media company within the healthcare, ecosystem. It expanded at that point into hospitals and health systems, into health IT, into orthopedics and spine, to go with being in surgery centers. So that's sort of the genesis of it. Without going into so much detail, I'll put people to sleep, but that's sort of the background on it.
Sure. So yeah, Scott, how many employees do you have?
Currently, we have between 70 to 80 employees. We're sort of always hiring, and it's and working like crazy to keep the culture going in the right direction, people going in the right direction, everything working in the right direction in a time of tremendous change. But we're up 10, 15 employees from a year or so ago. After being very frightened at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, things have rebounded fine. And we've ended up hiring a bunch of people, and it's moving in the right direction. But it's a constant, challenge to make sure we have an environment that our people want to work in, that they have opportunities to thrive, opportunities to be connected, opportunities to have a great culture and to get paid well, all those things. And so, but we're at about 70 something employees currently and hiring.
Scott, you just mentioned culture twice. And I know culture is just such a big part of being an entrepreneur and growing a successful business. So talk about Beckers Culture, and what does that look like for you when you think about your company and the culture that you're trying to maintain and grow?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We've got a magnificent CEO, present CEO, who's been in the business now for 16 years plus now around. She joined me literally right out of college, and has done just a magnificent job of building a culture of, a whole mix of qualities go into culture of opportunities for people, opportunities for growth for people, opportunities for people to perform, opportunities for people to give back to the community, all kinds of things. And it's, and that's strengthened by a lot of leaders in the company. There's a chief operating officer who's also been with us for 12, 14 years now. Two of our editors-in-chief have been with us for a long time. And a lot of the event management and key account management people have been with us for a long time. And it's a culture of very much, audience driven, customer driven, but also trying to make sure we're hiring wonderful people, both wonderful ethically as well as wonderful performers. And so it's, it's this constant balance of trying to build a very nice and very performance-driven culture. And it's, in that connectivity, I think all of us in business face similar challenges today of trying to retain that connectivity amongst people in a time when everybody's more or less remote compared to where they used to be. And so it's a constant effort to maintain a thriving culture where people can thrive, where the organization can thrive, where people can get great experience and learn and grow, and at the same time maintain connectivity in a time when everybody's virtual and remote today.
Yeah. So, Scott, I follow a number of your, your daily communications. How many different, I don't want to call them newsletters because that's kind of an older term, but how many different ways can people hear from you on a daily basis?
Sure. Well, we have an editorial team of 20 to 25 writers. So they don't hear, they hear from Beckers Healthcare. They hear from it. The flagship is the Beckers Hospital Review, just core daily electronic newsletter. But then there are a whole number of newsletters around that. There's a CFO newsletter, a health IT newsletter, a revenue cycle newsletter, a surgery center newsletter. There's a orthopedic and spine newsletter, a lot of different specialties within that, but they all float down from really the CFO, CEO newsletters and the main flagship one, which is the Beckers Healthcare one.
That's it's pretty intense stuff, right? I mean, especially in the last 18 months, given the pandemic that we've endured. How do you determine where you get in? What makes the grade? Editorial,
sure.
Right? I mean,
well, what
so
happens is, which an interesting thing, we started when we really got going in earnest 15, 17 years ago. We very much were a digital first approach and conferences. Those were the two things. We weren't driven by print. The main player in the space is a magazine called Modern Healthcare, which does a magnificent job, but they were so strong in print that we were self-funded and couldn't fight that. So we ended up really aiming to be digital first. The beauty of digital first is you get constant feedback from readership as to what people are reading and what they find interesting, what they don't find interesting. So, I'm a relatively well-educated person, for better or for worse. And when I really started this, I thought I would write deep analytical pieces, strategy pieces, research pieces. And what you would find is those would get very light readership compared to the core news of the day. What's the most interesting news that's going on in the day? And we were able to constantly pivot to being more and more focused on what is the news of the day, what do readers want to read versus what I thought I wanted to write. And that was an evolution for us. But the digital sort of ecosystem makes it easy to see what people read and what they click on, what they open, what they don't. And then the great game is to make sure that you're not sensationalizing, that you're actually hitting stuff that's useful, that's newsworthy, that's relevant, that people care about, without being clickbaitish or without being, yellow journalism, which is the old term from, I don't know when it's from, of sensationalist journalism. So it's this constant effort to hit it down the middle, but what readers are interested in reading about.
I'm curious, Scott, talk about, do you guys use your own proprietary software to keep up with your analytics for readership, or do you guys use third? How does that work, and how many subscribers do you have? Can you give me the scale of that?
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers on subscribers. I know that the website gets millions of hits a month. I don't know the exact number. I get a stat on it, but our editorial team reads the stats much more close than I do today, and our business team reads the stats much more close than I do today. But I know it's millions of visits a month, and the newsletter goes out to, I don't even know the number today, how many people, I just don't know exactly the number, but it's a huge amount, and it's constantly trying to make sure that it's relevant, concise, useful, because that's what our readers want. And if you don't keep it relevant, concise, useful, people don't stay on. They don't click, they don't open the newsletter, they don't read it. And we get constant stats on how we're doing on how many people are opening and reading and listening and all those things.
Yeah, it's like I think they say that it takes 7 touches to make an impact on somebody, and you've got, I believe online, it's something like less than 7 seconds to make an impression to get somebody to read on.
It's a great point you make. In the old days of advertising, the core concept was it took 15 times in front of somebody's mind till they started to sort of know you and take you seriously and understand you. So the concept was, and this is an old Ogilvy on advertising thing, or the famous minds in advertising. So you're in front of somebody once, they have no idea who you are. You're in front of them twice, they have no idea. It's about 10, 15 where you see the brand and you start to know the brand. The challenge today, in today's information overload world, that number is, it's much more complex to understand what that number is in terms of whether somebody really becomes a follower. So, for example, if somebody signs up for your newsletter, they truly sign up, the chances of them staying on as a reader are much, much higher. If in contrast, you just put emails into your news list, the chance of them staying on and reading and listening are infinitesimally small. You follow me? So it's a fascinating study in this concept of it. Used to take that concept. It used to be 15, username 7, whatever it is. In an information overloaded world, you really have to be concise and relevant for people to want to read you or read whatever you're putting out.
You know, I haven't had an opportunity, obviously, to spend a lot of time with this publication. I was actually looked it up when we got in here, to be completely honest. But I'm curious, CJ, from your perspective as somebody that's a regular reader, what do you find is the greatest value that you get from the publication that comes out, especially in this kind of rocky past 18 months?
Honestly, one of the things that I value the most, because there's so much information that comes digitally to me every day through email, is the quick hits of information, right? So Scott's team has perfected the headline with 4 things to know. The headline and the top 10 most frequent answers, right? Or things of that nature. Like I when this no surprise billing stuff was happening, it was the tip that Beckers Healthcare was the tip off for me to jump to action, to call legal counsel and say, hey, what's going on? And that's when Mary Spaeth and her group came to fruition. And all of a sudden we started engaging with legislators back pre-Christmas when everything was going on. It was Beckers Healthcare that there was a mention of it coming out of committee. Yeah. And here are the 4 things you need to know.
It's fascinating to me because, you know, you look at now all mainstream news and just the way that they're trying to get us to consume news now, and everybody is going to these, you know, quick hits. You get your morning 5 hits. Here's your top 5 stories. Yeah. Here's your top 5 this, because to your point, we are just so over. It's like a fire hose of information every time we go to our email. I mean, I spend half my day unsubscribing from stuff, and you don't even know how you get on the lists of some of these people. So,
no, but the observation is right on. And really what happens is, and this is really the great gift of the editorial team, but it took a long time to get there. When people come out of journalism school, and they come out of these magnificent journalism schools, at least back 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were not taught to write in 3 things to know, 4 things to know, 2-minute read types of notions that everybody really wants today. And so it took a ton of discipline from our editorial leadership, from the editorial team, to sort of move everybody into that direction. And we used to have rules. You have to write 90%, 70%, 60% of what you write in that fashion, even though we knew even if somebody wrote 60% in that fashion, 90% plus of what was read by them was in that fashion, because that's what people want to read. But we couldn't force a journalism team to write everything like that because they didn't want to at that time. They weren't built like that. Now journalists come out of school today much more focused on this short form journalism. We call it short form journalism. If you look at major magazines like The Atlantic or any major magazine, they'll have one really long article. And if you're like most of us, it's a lot of work to read that long article. Whereas in contrast, everybody reads the short articles and get their hands around, they get that feeling of success, they've got it done, they've learned something, they've picked it up. And it's just really where the world's moved towards. And we were very early on in it. And as everybody else has moved towards it, our editorial team, everybody else has been very, it just made it more fluid and more consistent. It's much easier to read.
So, I mean, the healthcare industry obviously is a wildly complex space. And then now, of course, you're describing all these different publications and magazines, different publications for the different arenas that you're involved in. Do you guys find it hard to balance quality and accuracy when you're trying to talk about complex subjects, but providing it in short tidbits?
Sure. It's a great question. So a long time ago, we made the decision that there's certain things that we couldn't do and be good at. So we could report on clinical things, but we couldn't be giving clinical advice. We couldn't be peer reviewing. We couldn't be deciding who's a great doctor, who's not. We couldn't be deciding is this procedure a good procedure or a bad procedure? We could report that people are doing it, that it's a new procedure people are doing, as an example. It's a lot of it is trying to stick within our wheelhouse of reporting the core things that are out there. But, again, we're not trying to make the news, not to be cliche, we're trying to report on it. And we have, you can't publish, our editorial team publishes 100 plus pieces a day, and we don't expect perfection. We expect our writers to do a great job, to work earnestly to try and cover the areas well, to do a terrific job. And then we correct quickly when people make an error. And errors are human. We expect them. It's okay. We don't hit it perfectly all the time. We try very hard to be non-biased, impartial, hit it down the middle, and report what people want to know about.
Scott,
We don't expect perfection. We expect our team to do a very good job, and they work very hard at it. And they've done an incredible job, the editorial team through this COVID period for the last decade of just making sure that we're relevant, concise, useful. And it's like everything in life, it's perfectly imperfect. They do a magnificent job, and it's, and they get 99 of 100 right. They're doing magnificent. They're 2.5 times as well as Ted Williams hit in his great years.
So, there's a lot of people that have high degrees of sensitivity in the healthcare space in terms of protecting their brand, protecting their reputation, and sometimes the truth hurts. How do you balance reporting the truth and reporting the news with managing those expectations and managing those relationships? Because sometimes those are the same people that can be your customer and be your sponsors.
100%. So as we've evolved, if you went back 25 years ago, it was a very different business than it is today. Today, there's there is a complete wall. I mean, it's not a perfect wall, but basically a complete wall between the journalism side and the business side. There are pieces of the business that are custom content, that you're writing a piece, a true white paper for an advertiser. But in terms of the actual reporting of the news and things that are news, it is there's very little input from the business team, and we report the news as the news is. I mean, we're not sort of like you see right now the Wall Street Journal's with this whole investigative journalism piece on Facebook. We're not in the investigative journalism business, but we're also, if I tell our editor-in-chief or one of our writers, don't cover this story, they're very close to us. Don't cover this story, they're an important advertiser. My writer or journalist will quit right away. It just doesn't, the writers and journalists don't really stand for it. So, and you can't build a sophisticated organization and play the two sides that closely melded together. We just can't do it. So it's like, as much as like people like me who are, business people and reporters and observers would like to, we can't. It just doesn't work anymore. It's something that we, might have screwed around with 25 years ago, but just our editorial team won't put up with it. There's no need for them to put up with it. If they write a story that reflects poorly on XYZ company, and XYZ company happens to be an advertiser, it sort of is what it is. And the news cycle passes so quickly that it is what it is. It gets written, they put it out there, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
There's not a lot we could do about it. I mean, just it causes so many challenges. If we start to tell the editorial team, these are our 10 top advertisers. If there's a bad story about these top 10, you can't cover it. We just can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you create an artificial product at that point. I mean, is it real news or is it not? And that's the thing. It's got to be timely and it's got to be authentic, and that's the game you're in.
And we're not trying to be in the investigative journalism business, and most of what we do is not. It's really what people want to know. If you're a health system leader, you sort of want to know, what are other systems doing? Are they laying off people? Are they hiring people? Are they really struggling with COVID? Are they not? What are they seeing? What are they doing? People read us to get a quick sense of what should they be thinking about, what should they be worrying about. If somebody reads it and says, these 83 systems are having labor shortages, the other systems having labor shortages can say to their board, it's not us. Everybody's having labor shortage. Everybody's having this problem, or there's just a whole million reasons. a million reasons that people read us, but they're not really reading us to see us go deep and angry after a particular company or not. But if it's in the public sphere and our writers write about it, they write about it.
Yeah,
and it's all good.
It's interesting, impartiality in healthcare used to be a given. But in the last 18 months, everything has become politicized. Everything. Right? So how do you ensure that your audience not just understands but accepts everything that you've told us here today? Like it's authentic. What I hear from you, Tyler and I are drinking the Kool-Aid, right? So how does Beckers continue to nurture that trust with your readership?
What happens is, over the last 18 to 24 months, through the COVID pandemic, it was always a challenge. If I went back before COVID, before the political cycle got so insane over the last 4 to 6 years or so, we've always prided ourselves, and our conference is a good example of this. We'll have at the same conference President Bush and Hillary Clinton. We'll have Nikki Haley and Bill Clinton speak. We've had Tucker Carlson speak a number of times. If Tucker Carlson speaking, we'll always have someone who's a strong, named person on the Democratic side as well. We've tried to hit it down the middle. And people have tolerated that largely forever, and we still do it. It's harder today because there's become such a crazed sense on both sides of the aisle that if you're having that person, you're bad. If you're having that person, you're good, or whatever it is. But like at our conferences this fall and next year, we hope to be back live in not very long, there's a balance of political sides of the spectrum. In the writing and editorial team, our writing and editorial team tries very hard in this discussion of vaccines, of mandates, of COVID-19, of reporting on it, to be very much reporting the news and not overly bringing narratives or editorializing to the news. And what you see is, I see almost every comment from, people send me emails constantly, and they could be people that are Republican or Democrat, blue or red, from whatever side of the aisle. And I'll get someone who's more progressive saying, I can't believe you reported that. I'll get somebody who's more Republican or conservative saying, you've messed up the stats on this. And we try very hard to do a couple different things, to be completely as nonpartisan as possible, as completely nonpartisan as possible, any political as possible. Second is, whenever anybody sends in any kind of complaint about a writing, I'll respond to them almost immediately and say, let me have a couple people take a look at it to see if we did hit it wrong or not hit it right. I mean, somebody said something about a headline yesterday of a Texas hospital, but two of our editorial leadership team takes a look at their comments and we try and make sure we hit it right. And it is everybody comes to this, whether you're a writer, a journalist, whoever you are, with their own built-in thoughts. If they're a person who writes for us that at home watches Fox, they sort of come with one built-in set of thoughts. If there's somebody that writes for us and at home they're watching CNN or NBC, they probably come with some other built-in kinds of thoughts. And so many of us don't even recognize that so much that becomes pervasive in our own tone or mentality. And our writers and our journalists, they work very hard to try and avoid being Fox or MSNBC, Fox or CNN, to try and hit it down the middle. I mean, they try very, very hard. And I know it's perfect when on the same day I get a scathing email from the right and the left. I know that they've hit it as well as they can.
Yeah. It's that lens. It's how tight is that lens that they're looking through. So.
Yeah, no, it's very hard. I mean, but they work very hard at it. They work very, very hard at it, and we share with them a ton of comments we get from readers, and readers can be very direct. I read Beckers every day for this. It's supposed to be great. It wasn't so great here. Why did you guys say this? Why did you guys write this? And we try and figure out, did we hit it wrong, or is the reader just missing the reading? It just doesn't like it.
Scott, how many
but we
emails?
Try and hit it down the middle.
How many emails a day do you get? Do I even dare ask?
Well, there's a whole different number of different email streams. I mean, I get a ton of emails, but as you know, in email world today, you can get thousands of emails, of which X number from real people with a real issue.
Yeah.
That make it through the spam filter. So what happens is, it's I got one from a very important hospital CEO this morning, and I get so many. I just saw it this afternoon. You usually respond very quickly, but if you're in a meeting, you don't respond that quickly. I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to respond to that one. We got something from a different reader who's irritated about something, and we try and respond right away. But you get thousands and thousands of emails, but so many of them you could just delete, which is not only because they're spam. They're not really relevant. Not that I want to delete somebody's real email. But it's it's sorting through it and being very engaged and very attentive to it. It's very interesting to me. It's very interesting to me, the connectivity with all the people and see what's going on. I find it fascinating, so I enjoy it. But it's literally thousands, but you're constantly deleting them, which is its own craziness. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of time management books that tell me that it's insane how I go through it. But we find it quite interesting.
Well, but that's also part of why you're so successful, right? Because the attention to that and the connectivity and your willingness to be that connected is part of why you're so successful and why people are so plugged into you, because they know that you're real and you're right there.
That personalization, because I mean, I can think of dozens of CEOs here in the Metroplex that I have some relationship with, and I can tell you that all of their emails are filtered through some sort of a director, an assistant, before it ever gets to them. And so you have that gatekeeper that's in place, but you got somebody that's given really great real-time news, and you can fire a question at him and get an answer from Mr. Becker himself. That's pretty cool. Right. That's pretty cool.
No, we actually love it. We actually love it. And one of the fun things is, when somebody sends a scathing email and they're like, and they get a response from you 3 seconds later, not a response ever. It's always going to be a response that says, thank you. Let's take a look at it. Because it would have to be, they'd have to be taking a shot at my firstborn or my secondborn for me to say something different than thank you, because we really are appreciative and we enjoy it. And they're actually shocked and pleased to see that we're responding to them, and they know, we have of course, we all come to everything with our own thoughts, our own lens and stuff like that, and we try and hit it as down the middle as we possibly can, and have an editorial team that does a magnificent job of trying to down the middle and report the news and what's going on and what's relevant without overly editorializing a narrative, making a narrative of it.
So Scott,
we find it to be great fun.
Yeah, so you mentioned that it sounds like conferences are getting ready to make a comeback. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So we had to move our September event, which is in health IT and revenue cycle, to virtual. We have an October conference, which is the Surgery Center conference, which we're cautiously, positively optimistic that we'll be doing in person in Chicago, and it will be it's either you have to be vaccinated or you have to have a negative test within 72 hours, something like that. Is I think the two core rules, and then there's masks and there's all the other kinds of things, and it's and it's trying to oh my goodness, trying to get back to in-person conferences. They're an important part of what we do. They're an important part of the ecosystem, and and they're an important part of our own culture and connectivity. And so we're looking forward to getting back to in-person conferences. We think the end of October is our first one that'll be live again. And that's a Surgery Center audience. That's a smaller audience than our Health IT and Revenue Cycle conference, which is typically a very, very large conference, which we couldn't do in person right now. And we'll see how it goes. And we're very excited to sort of see how it feels and how it goes. I know people have been going back to conferences. I'm going to a wedding this weekend in South Carolina, and hopefully, I think people are ready to get back to events. I was at another wedding recently for somebody's child, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, we're cautiously optimistic that we'll have an in-person conference in October. Magic Johnson is one of the keynote speakers at that conference.
Oh, man.
And that's one of our smaller conferences. And we know that it will be, if it's one of our smaller conferences anyways, we know it'll be even smaller right now, but it'll start getting sort of the wheels back on doing conferences and being in person. So we're very excited about it.
Yeah. So, one of my last questions for you here as we begin to wind down is taking a trip down memory lane with some of these conferences and some of these keynote speakers. So I've been to some of your conferences and heard, Ariana Huffington, and I've heard Lou Holtz and heard Tucker Carlson, and give us a few highlights from your career of speakers that you had the pleasure of listening to and spending time with.
Sure. So there's so many, and they cross the spectrum of, there's people like Bill Walton. Like Bill Walton is just a fascinating person to listen to, whether you're a basketball fan, not a basketball fan, just absolutely fascinating. He's got just a breadth of knowledge on so many different things. It's just fascinating. Obviously, Hillary Clinton, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, just an absolute pleasure of a person to be with. Just a pleasure, far more of a pleasure than I would have expected. George Bush, just a pleasure of a person. For all, these people don't make it to where they are without these crazy personal skills. And President Bush, Hillary Clinton, they all share that incredible, ability to be just a pleasure of people. Sugar Ray Leonard, fascinating. Venus Williams, the tennis player, just an absolute pleasure to be with. And some people are professional public speakers, some are not. She's just an absolute wonderful person to visit with. We had back in the day Bobby Knight several times, Coach Ditka, and Bobby Knight was, as he mellowed, was just was one of the great things I ever saw. As Coach Ditka became mentally less able, Coach Knight made so many efforts to try and make Coach Ditka look good on stage. And it was really a heartwarming thing to watch.
Wow.
Bobby Knight do this. So you didn't sort of what I love is the ability to bust through the stereotypes. So if you start with somebody like Coach Knight, who's got one reputation, but when you see him try and make build Coach Ditka up and make Coach Ditka look great in a time when Coach Ditka is struggling, you just see a different part of people. People on the right hate Hillary Clinton. You meet her in person. We've had her several times. She's just an absolute pleasure. People on the left hate Tucker Carlson. You visit with Tucker Carlson in person, and similarly, he's just actually very intelligent and a pleasure to deal with. And it's unfortunate because so many of these people on TV are now playing a role. Mm-hmm. They're playing a role. So Hillary's a very intelligent, very centered person, but they've all grown into playing roles of what their audience wants to hear. And Tucker Carlson, unfortunately, fortunately, my own sense of it is he took over that lead spot on TV. He's had to become a little bit further. It's not even right. It's not even conservative. It just he has to play harder to that audience than you see him in real life, And so it's a shame of what's happened on our TV and our politics and stuff like that. I mean, George Bush is as comfortable with Republicans as Democrats, as quite frankly as Bill Clinton. But even if Nikki Haley's still in the middle of the whole game. So when you talk to her, she is still on. She's still on message every single moment. Yeah. Whereas you talk to Hillary, you talk to Howard Dean, or still just like, they're still in the game, but they're not on message every single moment. They're not running right this moment. Yeah. So that you get to see them in a way like our family's totally mixed politically, completely, and everybody ended up loving Hillary Clinton, which I would not have expected because we have some far right people in our family that were not, that were not Hillary fans to start with, that just love and adore her. And so with Tucker Carlson, like some of our family is pretty far left, and they enjoy being with Tucker Carlson or George Bush very much. So I think it just is. I'm always surprised by it. It doesn't surprise me anymore. These people that we're dealing with that were former presidents that have had big public roles, like Arianna Huffington. I was not a HuffPost reader day to day, but when you meet with Arianna Huffington in person, she's a complete pleasure of a person. I mean, just a pleasure. And it's so many people you realize they just have insane political and personal skills. Yeah. And so most of them are just an absolute, you really enjoy visiting with them and dealing with them.
Arianna Huffington's personal story, really pretty incredible. I mean, she was given a second chance. I mean, that's so that's I mean, Scott, I mean, from my time at your conferences, the medical information that the community shares is fantastic, but the off-topic life information that your community generates may be more powerful than what we get as an industry peer-to-peer.
But I think that's very much the story of this great challenge with remote work is everybody wants the freedom of remote work, and we all love it. I mean, I'm here with you guys on 5 to 6 Central, and it's easy to do because I immediately leave the home office and go to the family stuff. So it's really easy. The flip side is so much that interaction that you get with colleagues that sparks motivation, sparks energy, sparks initiative can be lost in a completely virtual world. And that's a challenge that we'll sort of see, trying to find this right mix of in-person versus virtual. We've got a couple kids that are starting to go in the office, some for their businesses, for their jobs. And it's fascinating to see how important that is to connectivity and really feeling connected versus the freedom of them working completely remote. So it's a fascinating thing. As you mentioned, yes, I agree with you 100%. You can only watch so many of these lectures about a certain subject without wanting to shoot yourself, but it's interacting with peers and talking to peers and sort of getting some of this inspiration from people that makes it worth going to live events, that makes it sort of, where you really get to interact in a different way. And there's something lost when you can't do it. So, I mean, obviously I've grown to love the virtual world. I get to sit in my home office and do my work, but we think there's something lost in not having live events and live interactions as well.
I can tell you the 2 guys that are sitting here hosting this podcast would 100% agree. I don't know how you sustain the type of culture that you're looking for when you're building a business without human interaction. And I think it will come back once we get fully on the other side of this. I think a lot of the larger corporations are going to figure out that, yes, you know what I think it comes down to is you hear a lot of this, well, our productivity level is higher than it's ever been, or we're finding greater success than we ever have. Well, I think the simple truth of it is that they're just so thrilled that they have been able to successfully, or at least at some level of success, been able to perform the daily tasks with their employees being all over the United States and remote. They're just thrilled that they got to the other side. And I don't know if we really have enough statistics right now to say whether or not we're being more productive or we're not.
I think it's a great point. I think people like there are a lot of people that understand. I mean, you've got this. They call it the great. People are having a very hard time recruiting, retaining, all those kinds of things. And I think without great company culture, and it's hard to build it entirely remotely. I mean, we've all had magnificent remote employees, but they're often remote employees, partners, leaders that have been with us for some time and learned the business, whether it's the law business, the staffing business, the media business, whatever it is, and then they've gone remote. And it's very hard to sort of build a culture that we don't want to be a nation of outsourced remote people. I don't think. We might end up that, but it seems like a much harder way to grow and have initiative and grow connectivity and stuff like that.
So you asked Scott pre-show for a dinner recommendation, and I was in Chicago just a couple of years ago with my wife, and we walked into Ditka's, and sure enough, there's Coach Ditka hanging out at the bar, and we were there with 2 other couples, and without even saying a word, we went up to the bar. We were about to order a drink, and Ditka looked over and said, "I don't know them, but they look cool. Buy them all a drink on me." So maybe you should go to Ditka's. It's a pretty cool place. Good food, too.
Well, I got a good story. I played golf with his sons.
Okay.
Up at Bobolink.
Yeah.
And Dad dominates the gin table in the card room at Bobolink. There's some great stories that have come out of there with him wearing out the tiger print carpet in that card room. And
it's so funny you mentioned Bob. Somebody was talking about it today, and they said it's more like a fraternity with a golf course than a golf course with a fraternity.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely fascinating. I've never played there, but would like to. But it is what it is. But I don't have that golf game, that kind of golf game to warrant it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Scott, I do have one more question for you. If this didn't end up being your career path, you wouldn't have been an attorney, and you wouldn't have started this highly successful media company. What do you think you would have done? Where do you think life would have led you?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I don't know. I absolutely sort of like, I do today in a million years. I'll give you an example. So today, one of the people I had on the phone, I'm not on a phone interviewing for a virtual conference, is a physician who's the chief executive officer of telehealth for Providence, which is a $26 billion system. So, but the point is, in a million years, did that physician ever think that at some point in his career, if you told him in his residency he was either a urologist or a neurologist, I couldn't understand exactly. If you would have told him 20 years ago, his job in 2021 would be CEO of telehealth for a $26 billion faith-based system, he would have looked at you like you were crazy because that job didn't even exist.
Yeah.
So if you would have told me today, I'm, 3 or 4 years into doing podcasts, literally several a day, and both on the healthcare side and the non-healthcare side, that I'd be doing that with a huge majority of my time, I would have thought that was insane, And so I don't spend a lot of time looking back. The only thing I do look back and say is it's not so much for my own benefit, but I'll say to my children, look, you ought to think about this for your longer term or consider it, because these are people that I know what they're doing. They're really thriving and enjoying what they're doing. These seem like careers where they love what they're doing and they do well. They do fine. They do economically fine, but they love what they're doing. And you ought to look at things through that lens of, can you look at people and say internally, externally, at the companies they're at, do they love what they're doing, and is that something you'd like to do? And so I think of it in that lens sometimes, and in whatever period of the 50s I'm in, I constantly be evolving, constantly changing, but I'm not starting a whole new career that I would have had to start in my 20s to be successful. But so I don't look too much back at it and say like, God, I should have done this or I should have done that. I mean, there's different doors that opened over time that didn't go through. We went through these doors and it's worked out nicely, and we enjoy what we're doing today. I love what I'm doing today, which I would have been, if you would have told me I'd be doing today what I'm doing, I would have said that was crazy. And I love what I'm doing. So I don't know what I would have done differently. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into that discussion, but I do share those thoughts with my children a lot of these people seem to love what they're doing. Those are things you ought to think about in the long run.
Awesome. Tyler, any final thoughts?
This has been my favorite show that we've done so far. I've always been fascinated with the journalism space. My brother was a journalism major out of the University of Nebraska and works now as an executive for Verizon, running Rivals sports sites. And so we have a lot of...
How fun is that?
Yeah, we have a lot of great conversation about a lot of these same topics and how to really capture audiences and what are people really looking for. And I just think Scott's just a pro, and it's obvious. So it's been fun to listen to.
I mean, in that sports area of media companies, that's a fascinating whole different area as well. Mm-hmm. Back to the Frank DeFord days and stuff like that. But what's gone on in sports media online is fascinating to watch what's happened there, from the Barstool Sports to everything else, and what people listen to and watch and read. I mean, and now they're tied into the gambling sites. It's fascinating what's happening in that world.
Yeah. Well, that's maybe that's the next evolution of what we're doing. It's the play-by-play of surgery here, the play-by-play of a Beckers healthcare conference. Narrated by Scott Becker.
But it's fascinating to watch.
Wow.
Hey, Scott, thanks so much. To our audience, find us on LinkedIn, find us on Facebook. Definitely make a visit to Beckers Healthcare. BeckersHealthcare.com. Is that the website, correct?
That'll work. Or you Google Beckers Healthcare, you'll find it.
Google Beckers Healthcare. Subscribe. The content is well worth it. It is worth a few minutes of your time every day. And we look forward to visiting with you next week. Thanks all. Scott, have a great week. Take care.
Tyler, CJ, thank you folks very, very much. We appreciate the chance to visit with you. What a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys.